I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Poured Over, and Ayọ Bámi Adébáyọ has written an amazing book. It's called A Spell of Good Things. It's their second novel. It's a follow-up to the critically acclaimed Stay With Me from 2017, which I think a lot of us remember because it made so much good noise. It was so excellent, that book. But A Spell of Good Things is just out. I know we want to stay away from spoilers, but can I ask you to set up the story for listeners, and then we can go gallivanting off with all of the stuff we want to talk about?
Thank you so much, Miwa. Thank you for having me. So, A Spell of Good Things begins with a young boy named Eniola, and he's in secondary school. He's sort of preparing to write exams that will take him to the university. He wants to go to the university, but his family is so impoverished at this point in time that he's going to a school that he's having a lot of trouble in school because his parents can't pay his fees and he doesn't have the textbooks he needs. And then on the other side of town is Wurala, who's a young doctor. She's the perfect daughter of Nigerian parents. She studied medicine. She got all the good grades. She's not engaged yet at the beginning of the book, but at some point in the book, she becomes engaged and becomes an even more perfect daughter than she was before. So it's the story of both their families, really. We cycle through different members of the family, but these two people are the anchor characters. Their lives sort of intersect in all kinds of consequential ways.
This novel broke my heart so many times for all of the good reasons and all of the right reasons. And I have to say, I'm going to start with Eniola for a second because his dad gets fired as a teacher. His dad is a history teacher in secondary school, and the current government says, oh, no, we don't need the humanities. We only need science and technology. We don't need art teachers. We don't need music teachers. We don't need history teachers. We don't need the humanities. We only need the things that will push us forward. And this is what starts the family's downward trajectory. And dad can't find another job, and they can't pay school fees. And school just represents so much, not just to Eniola, but also to his parents, his little sister. I love his little sister. I love Busola. She is a great character. There are very excellent little sisters in this novel. I will say that.
Yeah.
The little sisters
I
are
love
rock
the
stars.
little sisters.
Yeah, they're awesome. But I do want to talk about what school represents. I mean, the teachers are not necessarily nice. There are a couple of things that did shock me a little bit. I wasn't expecting children to be hit because their school fees weren't paid. And I'm going to start with kind of a big question, but are we looking at the legacy of colonialism in Nigeria with just that piece of it?
And that's a good question. And I'm not sure that I can accurately answer it, really.
Okay.
The boarding school system, which is not reflected here, is definitely part of the legacy of colonialism. And many of the practices in terms of corporal punishment, I think it's also a practice that is unfortunately quite common outside of that historical experience. And school is such a huge part of Eniola's life because for him and for his family, it is a way out, But outside of what it represents for him, it's also a tool, in the hand of the people that wield power in this community, and they recognize that. And what kind of education is provided? You talked about the sack of the history teachers, and that was something that actually happened. And I wanted to think through that, consider how that was impactful and the kind of consequences that I think it even has until now on the education in Nigeria.
The flip side of Eniola's experience is Wurola. I mean, she's a medical student and the world is in front of her. She can do whatever she'd like, but her struggle is slightly different. And I don't think it's necessarily unfamiliar to an American audience. I mean, here she is, her parents are pushing her to get married because she's staring at 30. They're not focused on the fact that they've got this really smart daughter who's about to be a doctor, which is very complicated. And they're kind of like, "Well, have you gotten married yet?" And then she brings home a boy that they think is very, very acceptable. And I have many, many notes on her boyfriend, none of which can be repeated on this show because he thinks he's a stand-up guy, and his parents think he's a stand-up guy, and Wirola's parents think he's a stand-up guy. She keeps trying to tell herself that he's a stand-up guy because I think she just feels this very intense pressure to be married and to settle down and do what this dude wants, and he's who he is, but this guy is the worst. He's the worst. So here's the thing. Can we talk about these two characters? Did you start with the characters? Did you start with the story? I mean, there's some thematic consistency with Stay With Me, but this is a much bigger book and it's third person and there are way more characters and way more moving parts. But where did this start?
For me, Eniola was at the heart of the novel right from the beginning. And, you know, I'd had this experience where I had seen a neighborhood that I was so shocked by. Even though I'd lived in the city for several years, since I think we moved there when I was 8.
Okay.
And I'd never been in a neighborhood as impoverished as that. And I think the idea, I was just stunned by how blind I was and how little that I knew of a city that I felt that, in 2012 or 2013, that I felt, oh, this is my city. But I knew so little about it. And that was at the back of my mind. And a few months later, I started thinking about this boy, Eniola. And that's when I knew that I had, first of all, I thought it was a short story. And then,
Okay.
yeah. So it was, first of all, a short story. And it was when I got to the end of the short story that I realized it was the first chapter of a book, because it then ended with this interaction between Eniola and Motara, who's the little sister from the other family. So then I began with the two of them as the anchor characters, and that they were the anchor characters for the first draft. And then I came back to the beginning and realized that the anchor character for the other family was a different person.
Oh, that's so interesting because I know I mentioned this at the top of the show, but the little sisters are free in a way that Eniola and Worola are not. And, it's
Mm,
partially that oldest child thing, and it's partially believing what your parents tell you. And
mm.
then the little sisters are just like, none of you know what's going on. Not one of you has a clue. I just want to go to school. And to see these sort of minefields that are laid out, school should be, the way that you find a new life and make something of whatever's coming next. And marriage for most people should be a very happy occasion. They should both represent your future. And instead, they both seem very sadly complicated in
Mm.
and coded a little bit in desperation. I mean, I go back and forth on whether or not Worola really wants to be married. I'm not sold on the idea that she actually wants to be married. She's just kind of like, "Yeah, I need to do this and the party's fine and yay, but I really want to make my parents happy." She's just not. This
I mean,
this
I
might not be
don't
her
think
path.
I don't think she wants to. I think she's that daughter that has done all the right things to the
Yeah.
point where she almost doesn't know who she is. She has a difficult time separating what she wants from what is expected of her. And I think that's the same thing with the marriage question. There's such a fusion for her
Yeah.
between what is expected of her and what she then does, that it takes her a while to figure out, yeah, maybe this is not for me right now.
I suppose too, growing up with a mom like Yeye, who I love her. I love mom, I really do. There are some moments where I was very glad Yeye was not my mom. One of the set pieces in this book, we're at Yeye's 50th birthday party, and this is a really big deal. This is a really,
Mm,
really big deal. Her dad had died when she was younger. There was a very good chance that she and her sisters were going to have a very bad life because of that,
mm,
because of
mm,
the cultural structure
mm,
of her class and her community. And we learned so much about her in the span leading up to this party and her sisters
mm.
and how her sister saved the other sisters because she married well. And
Mhm.
we're not talking about the 1940s. We're not talking like this is all very kind of current, and I don't see how Worola wouldn't know that. Like this is what I'm like the obligation comes
Mhm.
first. And she's clearly a little bit of a daddy's girl too. I mean, she
Yeah.
really loves her dad. And it's very sweet to see. But she's not marrying her dad, that's for sure.
No, she's
I mean,
not.
she's just not. And I feel for the women though, because the misogyny
Hmm.
is pretty intense. And again, this is a novel that's set in the present day. Like, we're not going back in time. This is not, you have not decided to write about Lagos in 1920 or 1930. This
Hmm.
is like right now. And
Hmm.
it feels like it cuts across all classes. Like, it's just a piece
Mhm.
of the country's culture. And I'm just wondering
Mm.
how that, I mean, you live there now. What's that like for you when you're not putting it into your art?
I think that the misogyny is so woven into everyday life
Uh-huh.
that I think sometimes it becomes invisible. And that's one of the things I wanted to do with this book.
Right, right,
To look at all the ways that it's sort of normalized and
right.
it seeps into your consciousness,
Yeah.
over time. You keep getting all these messages about what matters and what should matter and what your life should ultimately be
Hmm.
about. That I feel like sometimes people don't see it anymore um,
Mm.
in certain instances. And so, for instance, when Matara begins to count how many times people talk to her about getting married, there was a time when I said, I'm going to do this. I'm going
Mm.
to make somebody do this in fiction. So what had happened was this was right off the back of publishing Stay With Me,
Mhm,
and I'd done
mhm.
an event in Lagos.
Okay.
And after the event, this gentleman comes to me and says, I'm very happy to hear about everything you're doing. I don't know this guy. And then it's like, oh, are you married? And I'm like, no, I'm not. And then he goes like, oh, well, you should get married because all these things are not as important. And I'm just looking at this dude. And I mean, I'm not sure I laughed in his face, but in my head, I was just laughing. Like, what are you saying? And then I walked away. And I think for the rest of the week, I was sort of thinking, why would somebody think that
Right.
they can walk up to me randomly and
Yeah.
say this, that it's acceptable to
Mhm.
say this? And they probably think they're well intentioned. I don't know. I don't know. So that's one of the things I wanted to do, that I wanted to look at not just the big manifestations,
Right.
of misogyny, but the everyday aggressions, not so micro really,
Oh,
that
no.
many, many women grow
Mhm.
with.
Yeah.
I mean, for instance, part of our origin story is that our own mother did not have a son, and her
Right.
father had a son outside of the marriage, and
Right.
therefore the son was the inheritor.
Mhm.
And there's all these things that have formed someone like he, and she might not even have the language or speak in that language, but some of it has shaped who she is and how she interacts with her world, how she positions herself, even in her marriage. I'm going to make sure that I'm going to be taken care of if anything goes wrong here. That was very important for me. That
Mhm.
I mean, as a young girl growing up in Nigeria, it was something that at a certain point, I think, I came up against, because I
Right.
think I was fortunate enough that it wasn't a thing in my family, really.
Mhm.
So I feel like it was more shocking to me by the
Yeah.
time I got out of the house. And I'm like, what?
I mean, I'm always surprised when women internalize misogyny, and I shouldn't be. I shouldn't be. Like
Hmm.
and it just I'm always really disappointed, to be honest, that there are women who buy into this storyline that somehow we are not meant to be in a space that we're in. Everyone's gonna do what they're gonna do. People are people. I absolutely understand that. But Yeye especially, I mean, I really like her as a character. She loves her children. She's just a little
Hmm.
ill-equipped, especially with Motara, who is her own person. And yet there are people who are just like, "No, she's spoiled," and I'm like and at first when we meet her, you kinda nod your head and go, "Yeah, she's a little spoiled." And then you realize she's not spoiled, she just sees the truth, and part of what you're doing in A Spell of Good Things is breaking through this idea of what's truth, what's reality, what do consequences mean? I mean, there are some characters who function without any consequence to their decisions,
Mhm.
and then there are others who are not as lucky. I mean, you are playing with really big ideas, and yet some of it is about who eats when and how they get
Mm.
fed, or how their
Mhm.
school fees, or how
Mm.
their environment shapes them. I mean, at one point, Eniola is learning how to be a tailor,
Mhm.
but his parents can't even pay the apprentice fees, so he might not get to be a tailor. Like, this kid is just out of options
Mm.
completely, and not
Mm.
any of it is by his choice. Not one thing is by his choice. And Corolla, kind of the same thing, only from a different angle. Neither of them really has a choice. So for you as the writer, how do you give yourself space to breathe in a story like that? I mean, there are moments where the story gets very, very intense. There are moments where and it needs to, and it's exactly where things need to go. But for you, living in this 24/7.
I mean, I think for me, honestly, it's part of it is one that it took a while to write. So I
Mhm.
was taking chunks of time away from it, And there were times when I just needed a break from it,
Yeah.
really. And I would just take a break.
Mhm.
And the other thing was really that I found two characters,
Okay.
or more than two, that I really enjoyed and who for me had that freedom. And it's the little sisters, I really loved writing their chapters, and the way they move in the world. They are at stages in their lives where their spirits have not been broken,
Yeah.
the way that many people around them have had their spirits broken. And it was just such a delight,
Mhm. Yeah.
And sometimes I would jump forward and make notes about them just because I wanted to get them. It was also fun to throw the party and
Yeah.
have all the sisters come down.
Oh, yes. The sisters are excellent. Yeye's sisters are
Yeah.
excellent, and I can imagine. So, I luckily got to go to a Nigerian wedding in the States once, and,
Oh.
between the food and the dresses and the dancing and the everything else, y'all know how to throw a party.
Yeah, we do.
I mean, y'all know how to throw a party. It was so much fun, it was ridiculous, and I don't really dance in public, it's just I can't dance. Oh, no, I danced. I danced.
You have
It was
to.
ridiculous. It was so great, but I was kind of a friend of mine's little brother married a Nigerian woman, and I was just like,
Mm,
"Yeah, I totally get this. I absolutely
yeah.
I can see this party, I can see the food and the just all of it." I can imagine that was a lot of
Yeah.
fun.
So that was fun to write, just have everybody show up and have just a good
Mm,
old Nigerian party.
that's so great. Did anything surprise you while you were writing? I mean, I know you said when you were writing The Little Sisters, you would sometimes jump, but there's so much that happens, and there's so many moments where the collision of characters or circumstance, um, is so great. It's so great.
So there were many things that surprised me, as I
Mhm.
was writing it. And, I initially thought there would be two characters really at the center of everything. And then it just kept getting bigger and bigger and
Mhm.
bigger. And I'm one of those writers that I don't know. I think it happens to many people. I think I know the story I want to write when I'm going in, with a novel. But I mean, I've done it two times now, so I think it's probably going to be the same going forward. But by the time I get into the middle of it, it's like I've discovered a totally different story. It began as the story of two teenagers living in the city, and then it became the story of the city, the story of
Right.
two families. Yeah, I was surprised by that. It meant that
Mhm.
it took longer to finish than I thought it would.
Can we talk about your literary influences for a second? You've studied with Chimamanda Adichie, you've studied with Margaret Atwood, but who are some of the writers who helped make you the writer you are now?
I mean, I think for this book in particular, that's Sefi Atta,
Hmm.
whose Everything Good Will Come was a very important book for me. I remember the first time I saw it in a supermarket, and I remember reading it and just not stopping. And it's a book that I've gone back to quite a number of times because
Hmm.
I think it has so much to say about Nigeria, about being a woman in Nigeria,
Hmm.
about the Nigerian state that is still so relevant even now, you know. So that's one writer and one book that I absolutely love. I mean, I've been reading quite a bit of Elizabeth Strout recently, and I really
Oh.
just have been having a great time.
Lucy
So
by the
good.
Sea.
Having,
Lucy by the Sea is
oh,
it
I
is
haven't gotten
the
to that yet.
okay, you have a treat coming. You have a treat. I had a little bit of a
Oh my
crush on
goodness.
William in O. William, and I'm just like, I have a little bit of a crush on a fictional character who's old enough to be my dad. This is a little weird, but okay. I will follow her anywhere. I will follow her anywhere. I just her the language is beautiful, the
Yeah,
characters are amazing. She's constantly surprising me. I
it's
mean, I
incredible.
she's oh, so good. So
Yeah.
good.
I have a friend who absolutely loves her work, and we both like read and just text each other like, I finished this morning, it's still so sad. You know, so that's one person whose work is just, you know, I think it's nourishing me, you know,
Yeah.
as a writer at the moment. Jhumpa Lahiri,
Hmm.
I really
Love.
love her work. I mean, I read a short story collection, I think when I was working in a bank here, it was the first time I
Uh-huh.
read her work. And it was just like, oh yeah, this is why I want to write. I need to get out of this bank.
Jumpa writes about those hinge like she does that moment where before tips into after, and it's like two sentences.
Yeah,
And it's this hinge moment. And you know, it's the thing obviously that every writer aims for, right? Like that's the whole point is to show that something has changed, right? And she just does it, and you kind of have to sit there for a minute. You just have to sit there with whatever, like, because it's at most two sentences, maybe three. Usually she
yeah.
does it in a single sentence, and you're like, oh, there is no going back. There is no go and just remember reading Interpreter of Maladies when it first came out and thinking, "This is what a story collection is supposed to be. This is" I
Yeah,
do love stories. I really love short stories.
yeah. I love story collection.
She's really the bomb.
And then I love what it means when a man falls down from the sky. You know,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
I just love that. It was incredible. Leslie Neka Arima. And then ZZ Parker's Drinking Coffee Elsewhere.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I love the fact too that you have this sort of wide perspective of writers that you're drawing from. I know I said this to you before we started taping, but yes, I'm in Nigeria in your world as I'm reading this book, and yet I feel like I'm seeing America reflected back to me right now. Present day America reflected to me. And the idea that I went to Nigeria to find my own country. It's just, I mean, that's why we read, right? Like
Yeah.
it's just that connection to another world and to characters that I would not meet outside of your work. And I didn't want to put the book down at all while I was reading, but there were moments where I really kind of had to take a deep breath and step back a little bit because this is life. There are complications, and we don't always get to do what we want to do, but also sometimes you don't get to make choices because you don't have any.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so, I mean, your characters, do you miss them?
Yeah, I think I
Yeah.
do. Yeah, I do. I do. I do. I'm trying to get into the next one so that I have new friends.
Uh-huh.
I think I miss some of the characters,
Yeah.
mostly the little sisters, you know.
I don't want to add, it's not so much that there's another book in this book because I feel like this world is really, it's exactly what it needs to be. And it ended exactly the way
Hmm.
I expected. And that's really all I'm going to say about that. I don't want to spoil it for anyone. But at the same time, it seems like there's so much like Auntie Caro and
Hmm.
the women. I really connected with the women in a way that didn't surprise me. But like Auntie Caro is great. And yeah, I know I've talked about Laurel as mom. But even Eniola's mom, like, she makes
Mm,
some bad calls. She really does.
mm,
I mean,
mm,
she has her children begging on the street and pretending to be blind, and she's pretending to
mm,
be blind, and Eniola's pretending to
mm,
be deaf and mute. But she really does. She loves her family. She wants the best for her children. She has to make really hard choices that I would hope no one would
mm,
ever have to make. She's not gonna have an easy path. Like, she's just not.
mm,
And at one point, even one of
mm.
her brothers is like, "You should divorce your husband." She's like, "Why would I do that? Why would I do that? Why are you treating this like it's a disposable thing? Like, yes, he lost his job, but it's out of his hands, and now you're telling me I can't come home unless I get divorced." It just feels like the pressure is on everyone.
Mm. Yeah.
And the men are a little clueless. The men. Not Eniola. That kid, he feels everything. He feels everything and he sees everything. But there are other men where I'm just like, oh, you're just bopping through life.
Yeah. I can think of a particular man who's
Uh-huh.
done that, you know, in this
Yes.
book. And I mean, I kind of do like him. I think he's a nice guy, but he's just has such a good life. He doesn't think anything could go. He's not right about that. And I think that, I mean, with Eniola's father, for instance, I
Yeah.
wanted to think about what it's like to have someone in the family who's having a mental health crisis, what that means for him and what that means for those who love him and
Yeah.
who are trying to love him through this difficult time,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know, and what it means when people that give him as much grace as they would, you know, if he had a physical sickness, you know,
Mm-hmm.
if he had something that was physically wrong with him, wrong with his body, he would
Mm-hmm.
have received more grace, you know, because I guess it's visible and they're like, oh yeah,
Mm-hmm.
he's sick. But
Yep.
he's having trouble with his mind, and many people are just like, he should just get off the bed, you know, and
Right. And it's not that simple. It's not that simple. I mean, Eniola's journey is really, it's powerful. It's certainly not what his parents wanted or what he would have
mm-hmm,
thought, but there's a certain
mm-hmm,
inevitability to it because
yeah.
he's out of options.
Mm, mm,
He's out of
mm,
options, and the idea that he's still like, you have this great line about him where you say, when he was little, he would close his eyes when
mhm,
something went wrong because he thought, well, if he couldn't see anyone, no one could see him. And that's such a sweet little kid thing to think. But by
mm.
the end of the book, he's still that kid in some ways, but
Yeah,
it doesn't serve him well.
yeah.
I'm really hoping he's okay. I'm talking about a fictional
Mm,
character like he's a real person, but I'm hoping he's okay. I'm hoping Rolla's okay. I think ultimately they're going to be, but
yeah.
I love ending a book and thinking about the world and the people
Mm,
after
mhm.
I'm done. And it doesn't happen with every book. It just doesn't. You don't necessarily get haunted every book. Let's not pretend that every book hits you the same. I had a similar response actually to Sing Unburied Sing, the Jesmyn
Mm,
Ward from a few years ago. And
mm,
just wondering about JoJo. And I'm like, is that kid okay?
mm,
Like, is that kid okay?
mm.
It happens. Comes with the job. I'm a
Yeah,
bookseller. What do you expect?
I mean, I think even for me as a writer, I sometimes, and this is really weird, you know, sometimes I think about my characters and I think that, I mean, when I'm writing, they become real people to me. You know, when I was a kid, I think my grandmother was bothered at one point because I used to talk to myself.
So you were gonna be a writer, basically. There was no going back. There was no choice. There was You were already doing it as a tiny person.
Because I used to talk to myself, you know, I think I would have all these conversations
Yeah,
with
yeah.
all these people I've made up and I was talking
Mhm,
to them.
mhm.
And sometimes, many times when I, particularly with a book, I just feel like these people are living their lives. They're somewhere
Yeah,
and their lives are continuing. I'm just not
yeah,
with them anymore.
yeah,
It's weird,
yeah.
but that's how I feel.
Well, but it also tells me that whoever wrote that particular book did their job, right? That we're
Mm. Oh,
so
thank you.
absorbed in the story and so caught up. The thing is too, the pacing in A Spell of Good Things is really spectacular too. Like it's always the
Mm,
story's always moving forward. And not in a way that made me feel rushed and not in a way that made me think I mean, yes, there were a couple of moments where I needed to stop because something happened and I
mm,
needed to process the thing that happened. But I never felt like I was taken out of the world ever.
mm, mm.
And occasionally, you know, it happens. You read a lot, you know, there are times where you're just like, oh, what just happened? No. I always needed to know what was happening next.
Mm, mm.
And there were times where I hoped for something to happen and maybe something different happened. I was doing a full body read on A Spell for Good Things.
Oh,
I was in it. I was in this book.
I'm glad to hear that.
But for you, and I know I keep coming back to this, but like for you as the writer, this is a really intense experience. Are you hopeful though? Do you believe we can actually change? Can people evolve? I mean,
I am. I think I'm a hopeful person,
yeah.
actually. When I finished Stay With Me, I said to myself, I'm never writing a sad book again. I will not do this. And
Hi. I mean, it's sad in the right way. Sad in the right way. Sad in the I have a heart, it is beating. I love these people, even the ones that are well, I you know who I don't love. But I mean,
yeah, I think that when I write characters, when I write a book, I have to care about the characters. I
yeah.
really
Yeah.
become invested in the
Mhm.
story, or I wouldn't finish it.
Right, right. I mean,
I'm just going to give up at some point, you know.
I got so attached. I got so, so attached to the people I got attached to, and then, you know, the one I wanna punt
Mm,
into the sun. I really wanna punt that guy into the sun. I really he was going to always be that person, and readers will find
yeah,
out how he ended up that like, he is just he's that guy, and
yeah,
he has no choice either, but I still wanna punt him into the sun. I really wanna punt him into the sun. I really and
yeah,
it's so wonderful to be able to talk about this very intense, big political novel. I mean, you're talking about trust and desperation and love and hate, all of the things that drive literature and art. And you and I can at least laugh about it because the humanity is always there. Like as long
yeah.
as you can see the humanity, it's one of those reading experiences where you get to feel everything. You get to feel
Mm,
everything. Yeah, reading's a really cool thing, and I'm so grateful you wrote this book.
yeah.
I am so grateful that you wrote A
Oh,
Spell of
thank
Good Things.
you.
Thank
Thank
you, thank
you.
you, thank you.
Hello, readers. It's time for another TBR Topoff. We're going to recommend a couple of books to pick up when you stop in for your copy of Spell of Good Things. I'm Mark. I'm coming to you from my Barnes & Noble in Cincinnati, and I'm joined by my book buddy, Jamie. Hello.
Hi, Mark. I'm coming to you from my Barnes and Noble in Leawood, Kansas.
We've got a couple of great books to talk about. I'm going to jump right in. I was thinking about novels that have a Nigerian cultural experience, Nigerian authors, stories that take place in Nigeria, and I couldn't not talk about The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abby Dare. This is a lovely book. It will destroy you and give you a hug afterwards in the best way. It is a lovely debut novel. It tackles realistic hardship. It uses a very authentic narration. And the heroine, she is so charismatic, and her louding voice, as the title shares, will just echo in your heart for a long time after you finish the book. We follow Aduni. She is 14. She has just lost her mother. She is being sold off by her father to a man to be a third wife. And the idea of transcending beyond this life in her Nigerian village is essentially laughable by most. But she is determined, and she knows that an education is one surefire way to help get her out of this village and into the world that she is so curious and hungry for. The journey that she embarks upon to find her voice and her worth is heartbreaking, but it is also heartmending. This is a story that really showcases a lot of what a young woman in Nigeria could really go through, but it is also filled with so much hope and so much inspiration. This is a character who I just want to spend so much time with her. I want to give her a hug. I want to give her anything that she wants because I think she truly deserves it. So please check out The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abby Dare. Jamie, what do you have for us?
Well, I have another book, another contemporary Nigerian fiction book, also about the experience of women in Nigeria. Black Sunday, the author is Tola Rotimi Abraham. It was a really compelling debut, which had the misfortune of being published just a couple weeks before the pandemic shut down. And so a lot of readers, I'm afraid, might have missed this great book. The story's built around 4 siblings. Really, it focuses mostly on these older twin sisters whose middle-class lives have been turned completely upside down. Their mother works for the government, and she loses her job as a result of a lot of political upheaval in 1990s Lagos. And then their father gambles away what they have left on a scheme that fails horribly. And so these girls are already living kind of right on the edge of just total chaos when their parents leave them and effectively orphan them. The girls are left to fend for themselves and for their younger brothers, their 2 younger brothers. They have to eventually relocate and move to their grandmother's home. And while they're, very urban kids who are raised in the new church, their grandmother is a traditional Yoruban woman, and she really is struggling to understand these 2 orphaned girls who've had to break with a lot of society's norms and kind of take on the financial responsibility of feeding their younger brothers when it comes down to it. They're just trying to cope with the loss of their parents while just struggling to survive when they get taken in by their grandma. And as the story continues from that point, the POV shifts between all 4 siblings. And we catch glimpses of their diverging lives over the years, especially though the chapters that focus on the twins who were once inseparable, but have moved on and gone on to do different things as they get older. And each character has just a unique and beautiful voice. The writing is poetic at times. Some of these glimpses we get capture just truly lovely moments. The twins chapters, like I said, in particular, are stunning. And you just feel deeply connected to these women as time passes. And you see how they cope with this life that they inherited. The book beautifully unfolds as a decades-long story and is just rich with details about Nigerian culture, the role religion plays, and politics. And it is, as I said before, just studded with beautiful, beautiful prose.
Such a good pick. And you're right. Like, I do feel like a lot of folks maybe missed out on this one because of the timing for the release, but please do not sleep on this. It's such a rich novel, such a great companion for Spell of Good Things. So nice choice as usual. So that is all we have for today. Thanks so much for tuning in to Poured Over. Please make sure to give us a rating and subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can also follow us on our socials at Barnes & Noble. Pretty simple. I'm Mark. You can follow my home store at BN Westchester.
And I'm Jamie. You can follow my home store at BN Leawood KS.
All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Have a wonderful day and happy reading. Bye.
Bye, Mark.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.